Miss Osuna here, continuing on with our tutorial for the shirt jack. So now let's continue on with our sleeve. So the first thing you're going to want to do is run a gather stitch in the cap of your sleeve. The cap is at the very top. That's the most curvy spot on your sleeve. And we are going to run that gather stitch in our seam allowance at 1/4 of an inch. Your gather stitch is going to be 2 inches to the left of your center and 2 inches to the right. The center, of course, has a notch. Now that we've run that gather, we are going to pull it, and the goal here is so that we can have a curve at our cap sleeve, but we don't want to see any gathers or puckers. So we just want a very soft curved shape. We did this at 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, but we're actually going to be sewing it at 1/2 of an inch seam allowance, so you will not see our gather stitch. So gently pull on one of the threads from the back of your sleeve and slide the sleeve fabric over so that you can start to gather up and see the curve. Now distribute that gather evenly. Again, to the left of your center and to the right of your center, there is a notch at the center of your sleeve. We will be sewing it so that we do not see any puckers or any gathers, so spread that ease throughout the area that you've gathered it. Half to the left, half to the right. And now we will be sewing our sleeve into our shirt jack. And you want to line up your notches on the sleeve cap. So the center of our sleeve at the cap goes to the center where our shoulder is on our jacket. And then you have 2 notches for the back at the underarm and 1 notch for the front at the underarm. So go on ahead and pin your sleeve. The jacket is on the table, so your shirt jack is on the table, but the sleeve is on top of it. And we're going to line up and match our notches and pin it and sew it at 1/2 of an inch seam allowance. Take your time as you place these pins and know that the pins have to come out because you cannot roll over them. So you do need to pin it in place and use as many pins as you need to make sure everything is lined up perfectly. But take out each pin as you get ready to sew because we cannot sew on top of our pins. All right, so as you get ready to sew, we are following a 1/2 inch seam allowance with the shirt jack on the table and with the actual sleeve facing up so that the base of the jacket is on the table, on our sewing machine table. As you're setting yourself up to sew, remember the goal is to have no puckers. So don't look at the actual gather line, look at the 1/2 inch seam allowance. That's where there will be no puckers. You will see puckers and gathers at the actual gather line, which is at the 1/4 inch, but you will not see them at the 1/2 inch seam allowance line. So keep your eye there. That's the reason that we have our actual gather in place, is so that we can have the shape of a curve without the gather. This is our set-in sleeve for our shirt jack. Now, once you finish, go on ahead and check your work. You want to make sure that there are no gathers, look on both sides, and then of course we want to make sure that you have your 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way across. If you have some gathers or some puckers, then you'll need to take out that actual stitch in that area. Maybe you'll need to take out 1 inch or so and re-sew it after you redistribute that ease. But double and triple check your work, because we cannot have any puckers or gathers showing for our set-in sleeve on this shirt jack. Now up next, we are just going to overlock our seam, and this is a closed seam. So make sure that you double check before you overlock that there are no puckers. Anything you need to correct, make the corrections and then overlock. Now it's time for our underarm seam, and so you want to make sure you line up the armhole at the underarm very carefully. Put a pin, and we want that seam allowance to go down so that it will follow gravity. Now what we want to do is start our sewing. I typically will say for a class such as ours, we want to start the sewing at the underarm seam just to make sure it doesn't move. But in the industry, they would start from one end and go to the other. So either from the wrist all the way down to the waist or the other way around, depending on the sewing machine operator. So just keep that in mind. For our class, start at the underarm seam right there. That way you know it's not going to move. Because when you do start from the far end, there is a good possibility, even though there's a pin in place, there's a very good possibility things will shift and it won't be lined up perfectly. And we do need that underarm seam right at the armhole to be lined up perfectly. So we're starting here at the underarm. We're going to go down to the wrist, and then we'll flip it around. Start at the underarm and then go down to the waist. Once you finish your sewing, then of course we want to press that underarm seam open. So your underarm and side seam will then be pressed open. That's why we previously overlocked them per our class instructions. Then you're just going to flip that right side out and move on to the next part. All right, that's it for this tutorial, and I will see you next time.